Hello everybody, it's Peter McLaughlin with BlueSky Hypnosis. Happy Friday. I'm glad you joined me here today. And if you weren't on the last two calls, one of the things that I really like to ask right at the beginning, I hope I remember to ask for it in the middle of this live session, is if you have questions, please put them in the chat box. Please ask those questions because your questions make this a much more interactive and much more interesting experience, especially for me. Like, I love it when people ask me questions, maybe that I hadn't considered, or maybe that I wasn't planning on talking about today, or they asked it in a certain way and it got me thinking. So love your questions, keep them coming. Also, if you have some ideas for upcoming content for these live sessions, be sure to share that with me because I'd love to see that too. Because I'm always thinking about, what am I gonna do next? And your feedback is really, really helpful. So in the last session, some people started talking about spirit guides and life between lives. So that's why I decided to do this topic for today. Spirit guides, life between lives. So why don't we start with just talking about what life between lives, what that phenomenon means, because frankly, the spirit guide is kind of a representative. They fall underneath the umbrella of life between lives. So we all know that we're living a physical lifetime right now. When we die, we don't lose anything except our body. Our soul, our spirit, our consciousness, whatever you want to call it, lives on. And one of the things that I was talking about last week, and forgive me if you were on that call, I don't like repeating myself, but I think it's important, is that the phenomenon of near-death experience, or NDE, is fairly widely studied. And the statistics that I see is out of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who are clinically dead in a clinical setting, like in an ER, for example, where they're hooked up to machines, no heartbeat, no brain waves. About 40% of those people, once they're revived, once they come back to life, will describe a period of consciousness that science tells us is not possible. My uncle had one of these experiences. It was a classic thing that you kind of read about or hear about where he felt like he was going through a tunnel of light. And on the other side, there were beings of light. He didn't know exactly who they were, but he said that he's never felt that much love in this lifetime. And he didn't want to come back, and they said, no, you have to go back because you haven't finished what you came here to do. Now, it's possible that one of those beings of light was his spirit guide. And the way I like to think of a spirit guide is like a wise teacher. So I have a question for you, and maybe you guys can throw in on the chat bar what you think the answer is. I don't care, it doesn't matter whether you're right or wrong. It's just an interesting question to ask because it will get to my next point about how do you know that this is real? How do I experience this sort of thing? So we know that there's a light spectrum. There's all different kinds of light in the light spectrum. Visible light is just one component of the entire light spectrum. So if you were to have to guess, what percentage of the light spectrum is made up of visible light? In other words, what part of the light spectrum can you and I see with these eyeballs? What would your guess be? I'm just gonna look here and see if anybody throws in a guess. And I won't wait a long time, I don't wanna bore you, so. Okay. So the answers, when I ask people in my live sessions with my clients in my office, they might say something as high as 20%. Some people might say, no, it's really, really low. It's like 4 or 5%. The answer, when I looked it up, absolutely blew me away. The answer is 0.0035%. With these eyes, we see almost nothing. We even have a statement, we have a saying that seeing is believing. Well, seeing is believing, okay, so these are coming in right now, 1%, 2%. Okay, you guys are fairly close compared to like 3 or 5% or 20%, but 0.0035%. And that phrase, seeing is believing, okay, seeing is believing a sliver of a fraction of a grain of sand on one beach in a universe. In other words, we see almost nothing. In Hamlet's Shakespeare has Hamlet say, I will bind myself inside a walnut shell and call myself master of all I survey. Yeah, there's truth inside the walnut shell. There's reality inside the walnut shell. but there's a hell of a lot more outside of the walnut shell. So that fact, along with the experience of NDE, along with some other things that we'll talk about later, leads me down this path, that this is really the largest horizon of the human experience, and that we've been mired for so long in the definition of reality. Okay, folks, sorry about that. My computer totally crashed on me. Not exactly sure what happened. Maybe it's time for a new laptop. I was talking about something about a walnut shell, something about Hamlet, and I'm going to live inside my walnut shell and call myself master of all I survey. Let's clear up some of this crap. What I was talking about was how weak and puny our physical senses are, and how ultimately it's what's inside of us that represents our greatest power, really kind of make us human. And these experiences that we have when we are in a hypnotic trance, or we're doing a hallucinogenic drug, for example, or we have a near-death experience, in my opinion, is we move out of the realm of the five senses. We start trying to see things with these eyes, and we start seeing with an inner sight. We start hearing with our inner ears. We start knowing with an inner wisdom. So when you want to do a spiritual regression, when you want to go into your life between lives, when you want to meet your spirit guide, when you want to do all of the other things that are available to you in that realm, it's really important that you understand you're going within. It's not going to be like you're seeing me in the same room and we're talking to each other this way. It's going to feel more like a dream or more like imagination. In rare instances, it can get a little bit more quote-unquote realistic than that. The first time I had a spontaneous past life regression, I was meditating with a group of people. I went to a life in ancient Egypt, and although I knew I was still sitting in that room, which you always do, I could see the color of my skin was darker. I could see the fabric of the cotton robe that I was wearing, this incredibly white, tightly woven fabric. But again, I still knew that I was in that room. Back to spirit guides. I was starting to talk about spirit guides. A spirit guide is basically like a wise teacher, someone that can help you navigate this confusing world and this even more confusing universe from a non-physical perspective. And the only way to meet with your spirit guide is to go within. Now, who is a spirit guide exactly? I mean, my belief, my understanding is that this is a soul who has evolved beyond our point of evolution, and now they're turning back and helping the rest of us. They're helping to lift us up, like a teacher would help you in school or a coach would help you on your baseball team. Why would you want to meet with a spirit guide? Well, let's talk about kind of the juxtaposition between a past life regression and a spirit guide. One of the ways you can do a past life regression is you can just go into a hypnotic trance, give an instruction to the subconscious mind to go back to a past life. You could even say a past life that pertains to a relationship struggle that I'm having. All fine. My preferred method of doing this is to have the client first meet with their spirit guide, kind of find their home base, if you will. Now, generally, when a person meets with their spirit guide, they have this incredible feeling of comfort. They feel like they've known this being, they've known this entity for a long time, even though they don't have a conscious memory of them. And this brings up a really interesting point for me, which is the emotions. You know, you could be having this experience where you feel like maybe you even start crying when you encounter your spirit guide, even though consciously your conscious mind is like, I don't know who this person is. Why am I crying? But there's a deeper part of you, like your soul or your spirit, that has this incredible recognition that something really important is happening right now, that you really do know this person. So back to what I do with a client. If they come in and they say, yeah, I'm having this relationship problem, my first thought is, what is the origin of that problem? And let's connect this client with their guide and then work through the guide. It's not me working through the guide, it's the client working through the guide to determine how to resolve this. Now, one of the things that people are from Dublin living in Belfast, obviously your name is Irish. I'm just going to pop that up on the screen there. because I really do want to interact with you guys more. And it's so easy to kind of get lost in the narrative of what I'm talking about, but I want to get better at this kind of going back and forth. So I went to Dublin for my 50th birthday. Loved it there. Thank you for being here on this live broadcast with me. Anyway, the guide. So the guide can help us understand where the origin of this trouble resides. Is it in a past life? Is it earlier in this life? The guide can also serve as a kind of safety valve. The guide is not going to let you go into a past life if you're not ready to deal with that past life. There may be a lot of trauma there. There may be something that you're not ready to encounter or see, and the guide's simply not going to let you go there. We can also find out from the guide really important information. So for example, I always want to help clients understand what is their purpose? Why did they come to this planet in the first place? What are they here to learn, experience, or understand? And how many lifetimes has this client been dealing with this issue? So the lessons that we come here to learn, at least in my experience, are things like courage, forgiveness, compassion, being able to find your voice and speak your truth, selflessness. And when I have clients ask their guide, how many lifetimes have I been working on this? I hear numbers in lifetimes anywhere from 1 or 2, sometimes to 20. And if you think about this, if a person has been working on the lesson of, let's say, forgiveness for 20 lifetimes, that means this is a pretty stubborn person that we're dealing with, right? That's really good information to know. And sometimes during a series of sessions when we're working together, they may get frustrated and say, I'm just not advancing as fast as I want to. And I'll remind them, how many lifetimes have you been working on this lesson again? That, you don't want to forgive your father. How many lifetimes has that been? And they'll be like, yeah, 20. Like, exactly. So for them to know they've been working on it that long, to know they're coming back for a 21st or a 22nd if they don't get it this time, can sometimes open them up and be willing to forgive, be willing to step into a situation that is deeply uncomfortable for them because they know now kind of what the stakes are and what's been going on. I put together some pictures here. I thought I'll just pop up on the screen. I'm putting up this picture of a Native American because in my experience, which is 14 years of doing this work, and these are rough numbers, so it's not like scientific or anything, but I would say about 15% of the time, maybe as high as 20% of the time, a spirit guide will appear to a client as a Native American, which I find really interesting. I find that really fascinating because we like to think of ourselves in the Western culture in contemporary times as being so advanced. And I suppose in terms of technology, relative to the last 5,000 years, we are relatively advanced. But I would say in terms of spirituality, in terms of understanding the non-seen universe, we're a joke. We don't get any instruction as to how the universe really operates or real instruction in terms of deep spirituality, whereas Native American culture, from what little I know and understand, are deeply connected with the earth. They're deeply connected with their deceased ancestors. They have a much bigger and broader sense of the non-seen world, the non-seen universe. So, okay, we got a question here from Dana Simmons. I'm gonna pop that up there. How do you remember your past life? So, I don't know if you heard before this thing, my computer cut out, but I was talking about how if you are in a state of consciousness, let's call that state of consciousness imagination, an imaginative state of consciousness. So for a child, it might be the state of daydreaming. For an adult, it might be having a fever. It might be doing ayahuasca or some other kind of hallucinogenic drug, or it could be hypnosis. When you move into that imaginative state of mind, you access a much larger world. And if a pre-recorded track, and I've got them here on my YouTube channel, feel free to go check them out. following the narration on a pre-recorded track, or being face-to-face with a hypnotist, or being online with a hypnotist, or even over the phone, they guide you into that state of consciousness, into that hypnotic, in this case, state of consciousness. And from there, then begin guiding you through the process. I would take someone to their spirit guide first, and then from the guide into a past life. And let's say in a past lifetime, you find something traumatic, which we almost always do, something painful. It could have been a horrible breakup. It could have been you were executed or something. We would then want to come back to the guide and heal that past life. So it's one thing to experience a past life, and sometimes just experiencing the past life, just kind of remembering it, can bring a certain degree of relief to whatever the underlying issue you're dealing with. But when I practice, I don't want to leave it at that. It's almost like a doctor might palpate your leg and you go, ouch, when they touch your knee and they say, well, you have a broken patella, and they say, okay, all done, I'm finished. No. We want you to move into the next state, which is to address that broken patella, to do something about it. So with healing a trauma from a past lifetime, we would do that in conjunction with the spirit guide. And the cool thing about the spirit guide is that you can then go back to the guide and say, did we get it? Did we heal that lifetime fully, partially, or not at all? If we didn't heal it at all, or if we only healed it partially, we would want to know, well, what else do we need to do to fix this? So this is another really important use of a spirit guide. You know, sometimes what happens is that a guide, there's no sort of mind-to-mind communication. They're just totally silent. And for whatever reason, the Native American guides seem to do that more. That's been my experience. And so I've learned what you do is you have the client, if they're willing, take the guide's hand and ask the guide to lead them somewhere important. And the guide may lead that client back to an earlier part of this life, to some situation that they were dealing with that was difficult for them, or they may lead them into a past life. Okay, can I ask a question? I've been reading that the world is about to shift into a new state of consciousness, the age of Aquarius. Thoughts? Okay, so here's my take on this. I don't know if you guys have heard about this concept of the great year, but you know how our normal year, 365 days, is divided up into 12 months. It's also divided up into 12 houses of the zodiac. Well, the great year is a 26,000 year precession, and it has to do with the elliptical orbit between our sun and Sirius. And these two suns move in this elliptical orbit. Well, we just came out of the age of Pisces. And at the age of Pisces, these two suns were the furthest or the farthest apart they could possibly be. And in this interpretation, the lowest point in human consciousness is when these two suns, these two stars, are the farthest away they can possibly be. And part of the idea for when Jesus came during the age of Pisces, represented by the fish that you see on the back, you know, on the bumper of a Christian, is two things, two ideas about this. One is to remind us of our true nature, to remind us that like Jesus was saying, you know, I'm not of this world, I am in this world. Or I am not in this world, you get the idea. I am not of this world, I am simply in this world. That it's a temporary thing. That you have a much, much, much larger consciousness. That you are not your physical body. And that as we move, so from the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius and onward, what's happening is that these two suns are moving closer and closer together. And the idea there is that as they move closer together, human consciousness rises. And we rise up from a dark age into, say, a bronze age, and a silver age, and a golden age. And a golden age is when the consciousness of humans is so high because of this great year in these elliptical orbits that we theoretically have no need to steal, we have no need to lie and cheat and all these other things. So hopefully that answers your question. That's my 2 cents on it. That's my take on it. Why else would you want to meet your spirit guide? Well, we talked about purpose, right? So a lot of people will say, what the hell am I doing here? Why am I even on this planet? Well, you came here for a very, very specific reason. And one of the aspects of the life between lives that you can ask your spirit guide to take you to is a pre-life planning session. So imagine that before you go on a trip somewhere, before you go to Patagonia, your tour guide company has you come into the office and they go over a map with you and they say, okay, here are 3 options. Which one of them would you like to take? And here are the different kinds of equipment that you can take with you. Oh, and by the way, who are you going to be bringing with you again on this trip? All of these things would be planned out ahead of time, which is precisely what happens in the life between lives, life planning session, pre-life planning session. And so I often bring clients there when they have a huge conflict in one of their relationships, like with a parent. You know, this is pretty common for people to have serious problems with one or both parents. And one of the questions we want to know is, did you, client, actually choose one or both of your parents to be your parents before you were born in this life? And maybe 70% of the time, the answer is yes. So if I'm having this horrible relationship with my parents, and it turns out that my consciousness actually chose them, doesn't that radically change the game? Yeah. And if you go back to the pre-life planning session, you can understand why you chose these people to be your parents. So one of the most moving sessions I had with respect to this topic was I was dealing with a woman who had a horrific relationship with her father. He did some pretty nasty things, none of which would be defensible as a human being. And she was just understandably at loggerheads with him. We got the answer from the guide that yes, she chose that man, that soul, to be her father in this lifetime. We had her travel to the life between lives component where the pre-life planning session is occurring. Who's in the room? Well, it's the client, it's the soul who's the father in this lifetime, it's the soul who's the mother in this lifetime, and it's the spirit guide. And when I had her ask the father, why are we making this choice? Why are you choosing me? Why am I choosing you to be my father? She burst out in tears and she was sobbing. And after her sobbing began to subside a little bit, I said, what's happening? And she said, he doesn't want to do this. He knows the kind of pain he's going to be inflicting on me, and he doesn't want to do it. He's choosing to do this out of some spiritual duty, out of some form of love is what she took away from this. And again, I'm not wanting to cover up or defend anything he may have done or not done, because we're still humans. I still think we have to live with some kind of a humanity code. But her takeaway was, he's doing this out of a kind of love, which completely obviously changed her aspect, her point of view. Okay, so somebody here is asking, Kenzie Sky is asking, how does OBE, which is out-of-body experience, how does out-of-body experience fit into meeting with your spirit guides, or perhaps even past life regression or life between lives? So great question, Kenzie. My answer would be that an out-of-body experience is going to happen in what people would call an altered state of consciousness. I'm not loving that term anymore because I think all of our states of consciousness are normal for us, and to call some sort of abnormal, I think, is not quite right. But it's going to happen either when you're sleeping, or it's going to happen when you're under the influence of a drug, or it's going to happen when you've willed it to happen using meditation or using hypnosis. So it's just another way of entering the quantum field, in my opinion. And when you're there, you theoretically could meet with your spirit guide. You could go into a past life regression. You could go into the life between lives. You could do all of these things once you have opened that doorway, metaphorically, and walk through it. Hope that answers your question. Essay. Are you going to write a book, Peter? Yes, I'm going to write a book, he says confidently. I've written, I think it's like 25,000 words on a book called Healing the Wounds of Time. And I've definitely got caught up in my channel and doing these things. But honestly, I've written another book before on a totally different topic. And for me, it takes a lot of discipline to keep sitting down and writing and writing and writing. So I got the 25,000 words done. That's at least a good start, and I need to do the rest, and it's just my own discipline. So yeah, I am going to write another book. Here we go. Pernil Voik. I'm probably butchering your name. I apologize. Hi, how do I know if I meet my spirit guide or if it's my imagination? From Copenhagen. My son was in Denmark, in Copenhagen last year. He loved it. Here it's a beautiful country. So Pernil, one of the ways you would know is through your emotions. What I mentioned before is sometimes when people meet their guides, they have this incredible feeling of love, or this incredible feeling of familiarity, or this incredible feeling of knowing. That would be one of the ways. The other thing I would say is that, well, I mentioned this last week, but I'll say it again because it's important, I think. In the theater, and this could be watching live theater or watching a movie, there's a phrase called a suspension of disbelief. So if you want to enjoy the play, if you want to get anything out of it, it's important when you sit in your seat and the lights dim that you just push away all of the critical thinking and you allow this experience, like making love or standing in front of Michelangelo's David, to just wash over you and experience it with another part of your mind and with another part of your body. And when you experience art that way, that's when it can be transformative. And the time to dissect the play or to dissect the piece of music isn't while it's going on. It would be afterwards. So, you go see a movie with a bunch of friends, and afterwards you sit down, have coffee, and you talk about the movie, and you say what you liked, what you didn't like, filmmaking techniques, and so forth. Now you've moved into your left brain hemisphere, the rational, logical part. I would say the same thing when you do a life between lives regression, when you meet your spirit guide, when you go into a past life. Surrender to the experience. Allow it to be whatever it wants to be. And then decide after it's over, when you've, returned to your beta state of consciousness, then decide what it all means to you. I mean, if you're getting sort of incredible information, if your emotions are moving, like if you're crying, if you're feeling tremendous love, these things, in my opinion, are going to be the, in quotes, the proof point that that wasn't your imagination. Along with, there's certain things like that woman that I talked about who realized that her father, her antagonist, her whole life, had come here out of a sort of sense of duty, out of a sense of love, and she burst into tears. To me, that's deeply persuasive. But she's the one ultimately that has to decide. And, again, from the outside, I don't think she would have made up, oh yeah, after a lifetime of struggle with this guy, and I think he's a jackass and reprehensible, now all of a sudden I'm feeling all of this compassion for him. So, long answer, my answers usually are, and I hope that makes sense to you. Thanks for asking it. See if there are any others here. Oh, here we go. I wanted to cover this. I asked him that question as a gift from Spirit. Oh, I think you might mean something else, but it actually brings me to something else, which is when I have clients meet with their spirit guides, I always have the client ask the guide, what is my spirit name? And when the client gets the spirit name, I then want to know, what does that name mean? Because the meaning of their spirit name can often pertain to a great strength that they have. It could pertain to a really important lesson that they need to learn in this lifetime. And one of the ways I look at all of this, I talked about the theater before, is I see us on this planet as actors playing particular roles. Now, this, like most actors, is not the only role we've ever played. We've played hundreds of roles, maybe even thousands. And my name, Peter McLaughlin, in this lifetime is kind of like my character in this one play I'm in. My spirit name would be my eternal name, my permanent name. And that name has a meaning. And that meaning, as I said, pertains to something really important about you, about your gifts, about your strengths, maybe even why you came to this planet in the first place. So I will also have the guide give a gift, an object to the client. I do this for a couple of reasons. One of the reasons is that before there's any kind of communication, which I don't think I've said this yet, but it's all mind to mind, thought to thought, is a sort of bridge, if you will, between us as humans, where we're kind of wired for things to be physical. Now, the gift doesn't come as a physical object, but it comes in their mind as an object. And the client often feels powerful emotions when they receive this gift. And then the next question I have the client ask the guide is, of all the gifts you could have chosen to give me at this stage of my development, why did you choose to give me this one? And the gift is often another very powerful insight into the spiritual lesson for this lifetime. So if you're given, say, a heart, the lesson is usually to learn to love yourself. If the gift is a key, then it must unlock something. So we would want the guide to bring the client to whatever box or door possesses the lock that this key will open. So that thing about a gift is really, really important. Another one that I will not always ask, but often will ask, is what animal, I might ask, is there a spirit animal for this client? Is there an animal who has the traits and the capabilities and the abilities that the client needs right now? This one can be extremely revealing. So a number of years back, I was going through a pretty difficult time in my personal life. And I went to my guides and I asked them, is there an animal that represents what I'm going through right now? Now, I was expecting, or what I really wanted, is I wanted an animal like a big cat, like a lion, like a cougar, like a panther, or a tiger, or something like that, something sleek and really strong and powerful. And what I got instead was, I got a frog. I saw a frog jumping like this. And mentally, I tried to take control, which is always a bad idea. It's really important to just let this wash over you and don't push anything away no matter what you get. But I did that. I pushed it away. I pushed away the frog and I kind of took a breath and I said, all right, show me an animal, a creature that will help me understand what I'm going through right now. And I waited. And I got a frog. Boom, 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 boom. And so I said, all right, fine. Why a frog? And the answer I got was, it's a leap forward. This pain that you're experiencing right now is actually leaping you forward, vaulting you forward, the way a frog jumps. So to me, this was like incredible wisdom. Absolutely, deeply powerful wisdom. All right, so I'm going to go to another question here. AW, thanks for writing in. If we can view past lives, can we view future lives? I've heard time is not linear. Absolutely. That is definitely my experience. That is definitely my understanding of quantum physics. That there is no time. That time is an illusion created by a planet rotating on its own axis and then revolving around the sun. That these two actions give us the perception of what we call time, and that just outside of that system, there is no time. So one of the ways I've made sense of this for myself, and I love this question, is like a high-rise building. So AW, if you and I were on the 17th floor of a 68-story high-rise, we would accept that there are people going about their lives on all of those other 67 floors, even though we couldn't see them, hear them, touch them, so on and so forth. In other words, we wouldn't have any physical evidence, unless we were on the phone with them, that there's anyone else on any of those other floors. And then we can walk over to a thing we call an elevator, and we can get on at the 17th floor and press 61 and go up to the 61st floor, and now all of a sudden that becomes our reality. Now we're not really aware of exactly what's happening at this moment on the 17th floor, now we're on the 61st floor. But all of these 68 floors are roughly in the same time-space continuum. Yeah, they're about 10 feet apart, but you kind of get the idea, right? Everybody is largely in the same place. So yes, I have taken clients into future lifetimes. I've taken clients to incarnations on other planets. I've taken them to the life between lives. I've taken them to past lives. I've taken them to earlier in this lifetime. One of the really powerful things I love to do is something called a timeline, where a person, let's say, needs courage. You go back to the moment at which courage was kind of broken, and you repair it at that moment, and the person feels the difference inside of them of possessing that courage. And then you have them go through a timeline in their life, in the past, and you can project into the future, of taking this feeling with them in all of these similar circumstances. So if a person were afraid of public speaking, you could take them, for example, to a past lifetime where they were really good at public speaking. Or you could have them temporarily step inside another person's body who's really good at public speaking. Or you could take them, and I do this a lot, to their future self. The future version of Ralph, who has figured out and solved this problem and become a wonderful public speaker. Have them be in that body in the future, noticing how they're standing, noticing how they're looking out of these eyes, how their voice sounds, how they're going about this. They can step in that body and have that experience in front of an audience of 5,000 people. And then you can anchor that and take it back with you to the quote-unquote present moment. So, awesome question. I feel like I could talk about that one for a long time, but I'll move on to the next question. Let's see here. Here we go. Dara O'Sullivan. Peter, I found a talk saying that past life regression is the same as channeling attached or earthbound spirits. What are your thoughts? So I'm going to talk about attached earthbound spirits first. I'm going to first define them as to how I would define it. So roughly speaking, I would say that we have a soul or a spirit. That's a non-physical aspect of us, and then we got this physical body, and that the soul or spirit takes up residence inside the physical body. When the physical body dies, I think we're supposed to do what people report when they have a near-death experience, which is to go through something kind of like a tunnel of light or something similar, and then connect with beings of light, maybe deceased relatives, and we move into the life between lives. We leave the body behind because we don't need it anymore. It's like an old car you used to have. It goes to the junkyard, you never think about it again. People who are afraid of what happens after their physical body dies, they might think that they're going to hell. They might think that they're going to oblivion. They might be so connected through guilt or through greed or through something else to this plane that they don't want to leave it. And free will is kind of the first law of the universe, in my opinion, so no one's going to force them to leave. But because they don't have a physical body, they can't really experience this lifetime to its fullest extent. And so what they may do is attach themselves to another corporeal, living person with a body. A person with a body becomes vulnerable to a spiritual attachment when they are when they're drunk, when they're high on drugs, when they are extremely angry or depressed, or when they're having intimate relationships with another person who has an entity attached to them. And in this sense, I see these spiritual entities as kind of like a parasite. You know, you eat uncooked meat and you could, or unwashed lettuce, and you could get a physical parasite. You still function, but it sort of drags you down. So to me, this is kind of a separate issue, and it's something actually that comes up quite a bit. And it's, when it does come up, with the help of the spirit guide and with help of, say, angels, we would want to move those attached entities out. Now, to the part about is a past life where you're somehow interacting with an attachment or an earthbound entity, I don't think so. I mean, I have no way of proving this one way or the other, but my experience leads me in the direction of I don't think that that's what it is. I think that the attachment is something else. And frankly, that's one of the things I kind of want to make sure we're not dealing with, because if you have that kind of parasite, it's hard to connect with your spirit guide. It's hard to go into a past life. It's hard to heal old wounds and traumas because this thing is in the way. So the first order of business, if a person has attachments, is to move that out of the way. Then verify that they don't have attachments anymore, and then move forward with the spirit guide, maybe, life between lives, past lives, and so forth. Hope that answers your question. I'm going to roll back up here. More people from Dublin. Awesome. Here we go. Camilla. My wolf is my mystic guide. He has breathed information into me. It's beautiful. It's awesome. You know, sometimes when I'm bringing somebody into hypnosis and bringing them to meet their guide, sometimes an animal comes. Most often, and I'm not saying this is the case for you, Camilla, but most often the animal is almost like a precursor to the guide. And often the animal, if you ask it, will lead you right to the guide. Often the animal possesses, as I mentioned before, traits, abilities, characteristics that are really important for you to possess in this lifetime. Sometimes the animal can shift into a more human form of the guide. Now, that kind of leads me to something else, which is your guide, in my opinion, can present to you in any way they wish because they are a non-physical entity. They know that we, right now anyway, are physical entities, and that's how we connect with things. What things look like, what they sound like, what they taste like, what they feel like, so on and so on. And this is why when people have near-death experiences, let's say it's an elderly man passes away and he meets his predeceased wife, he doesn't usually meet her as someone in her 70s or 80s. He usually meets her at like the age of 26, like maybe when they were first together. Or why, if you know a person passes away and they meet a grandparent, they don't meet them when they were 80 and hooked up to an oxygen machine. They usually meet them at, say, 62 or 65, when they were kind of at the flower that represents the relationship between those two people. So how the guide presents, the attitude that they take on, in my opinion, is really based on what we need in that moment. So a guide could be, and sometimes they could be very stern, very kind of authoritarian, kind of uncommunicative. And then by the third or fourth session, they might be like a joker, getting the person to laugh. Because like a really good coach, they know us, and they're using all the tools at their disposal to try to help us get from where we are in this moment to the next phase of our evolution. Okay, I love that you quote Shakespeare as an English poet and writer. So I used to be an actor. I'm still in all the acting unions, and I was terrified the first time I did Shakespeare. I was kind of conned into doing it. And over time, I came to really appreciate and love the language and the brilliance of Shakespeare or whomever wrote all of those plays, if you tend to lean in the direction that I do, which is he probably didn't write those, but whoever wrote them was just absolutely brilliant. And so many references are to the things that we talk about, like here in this live session, talking about the much larger picture, if you will. So thanks for commenting. Okay, this is before things got, yeah, the screen got stuck. That was my computer just dying. Not really sure what happened there. Here we go. SA says, I am a natural born intuitive and spirit communicator training to be a hypnotherapist. Oh, good for you. Awesome. I am particularly excited about guiding life between life sessions. Yeah, I mean, it's phenomenal. You know, people, like if you think about something like grief, or you think about some other, well, actually any event, any horrible, difficult event that would produce grief, you know, one of the first questions that we ask as humans is, why? You know, why me? Why them? Why did this happen? And I find when I work with clients and they're dealing with grief, you can help them answer that question. And when you can help them answer that question, it obviously doesn't bring the person back in a physical form, but they can connect with that person in a non-physical form. And when they can understand, when the client can understand the larger reasons why this event occurred, that it's part of a larger mosaic, then the grief, in my opinion, begins to shift like a wound shifts from being an open wound that's bleeding to being a scar. It never goes away, but it doesn't hurt when you touch it. So yeah, I feel like life between lives, spirit guides, the Akashic record, pre-life planning, going into the future, past lifetimes, that this is, to me, this is the great frontier of human exploration. You know, the wooden sailing ships long ago visited all of the lands on this tiny little earth. And that kind of exploration seems like it's run its course, but the exploration of our consciousness, the exploration of our spirituality, I feel like we're just scratching the surface. So, you know, glad you're joining. Welcome and thanks for commenting. Watching from Northern Ireland, so many Irish people here. This is wonderful. Thank you for joining from Northern Ireland. Somebody from Florida. A wolf came into my world last year. Let's see if there's another question here. Skip down. All right, SA has another one here. I just had a thought about past life regressions. When I had a PLR, past life regression, that involved fire, I actually smelled it. That doesn't happen in dreams, and I lucid dream every night and remember my dreams every night. Wow, that is really interesting. So that's an example of what I was talking about at the outset about posing questions. I mean, sometimes like this, I don't lucid dream every night, and so it's so interesting for me to hear you say that with all of your experience with lucid dreaming, you have never actually had the experience of smelling something, and yet when you did a past life regression, you could actually smell the fire. One of the things that I work with people on are fears and phobias. I always ask the question on my intake form, what are your fears and phobias? And I ask that question because there's a strong possibility that if you're afraid of driving over bridges, if you're afraid of heights, if you're afraid of these, you know, things of that nature, chances are something traumatic happened in a past lifetime that involved that sort of thing. And if we find that past lifetime and we clear or heal that incident, that fear may significantly dissipate. I had a client that sent me a picture of being at a hockey game with his 7-year-old son. This is obviously before this situation that required a lockdown and whatnot, but he was saying, I couldn't have done this before. And it's true. He wasn't able to go to restaurants. He wasn't able to travel. He wasn't able to go to sporting events. He wasn't able to do all of these things because he had this very, very, very strong fear of being trapped. And when we went into his past life, he was on a warship sounded like in World War II, that was being attacked, and the ship was getting hit by bombs and or torpedoes. And he said that he was standing by his bunk under, below decks, and he knew that the end was coming. And he stood there by his bunk looking at a black and white photograph of his wife and 2 children as the water was rising up, and then he drowned. And one of the reasons he was able to go to that hockey game with his 7-year-old son was because we found that old trauma and we healed it. And we did this with the assistance of his spirit guide. So when I had him ask the spirit guide, did a trauma in the past create this feeling of being trapped and this phobia? The answer he got from the guide was yes. When I had him ask the guide, did it happen earlier in this lifetime? Nope. Did it happen in a past lifetime? Yes. Do I have permission, client, to go into the past life? Will you show me the relevant scenes where this happened? Yes. Once we found that scene of where he drowned on this ship that was sinking, we brought him back to where his spirit guide was. And then what we do is we bring the past life self, the sailor who died on that ship. And in his case, in that sailor's case, because the last thing he saw was his wife and two children in that black and white photograph, we asked the guide, again, we keep working through the guide, is it in the highest and best interest of all concerned to bring this man's wife and his children to be reunited with him? Because ultimately that was the biggest pain he suffered in that moment. It wasn't his own death, it was that he was cut off from them. And we reunited them together. We had the past life self reach inside his own body and take out his fear, take out his own grief, take out his own pain, and put it on the fire. Fill himself with light. Ask the guide, is he fully healed now? Answer is yes. Once that happened, we asked the past life guy, what advice do you have for current day client? What do you want him to know about life? He tells them. And then we let them, the past life people, go into the light. That's how this works, at least the way I do it. I always want to blend, if I'm working live with someone, spirit guide with whatever tool we're going to go to. Future progression, past lifetime, earlier and present life, and so forth. Oh, here we go. Kenzie Sky, shamanic journeying is great. I saw things before they happened. Wow. Okay. So the little I know about shamanism, it sounds an awful lot like an earlier version of the same kind of work. I believe that it's just different language describing the same things. So when a shaman talks about helping a person go back in the past and retrieve lost and wounded parts of themselves, of their soul, and healing that, I think it sounds an awful lot like with your spirit guide going into a past life, finding the old wounds and healing them. So yeah, I think there's a lot to be learned from the shamanic tradition. So we're coming to the end of today, but I'll answer a couple more questions for sure. And also, I just wanted to give another pitch. Well, a couple of things. Why don't I pitch making sure that if you haven't already, you subscribe to my channel to get more content coming up. And also to suggest either now or later, because this just goes into a piece of content. So if you don't get to see the whole thing now, you can rewatch it later. To suggest other ideas for future doing live at 5 on Friday, because it's so much more interesting. It's so much more effective, I think, if you've got multiple people that are focused on the same thing, and you guys are telling me really what you want to see, what interests you at that moment. So please feel free to shoot whatever ideas you think would be interesting to you for future Fridays live at 5. All right. Let's see if there's any more here. Okay, so this one is kind of cool. So SA was answering a question for somebody else, and he or she said, they become integrated memories in our present lives, just as memories we make in this life do. I think there's enormous amounts of truth in that. The subconscious mind can't really determine between something that actually happened on this physical plane and something that we imagine happened on this physical plane. So if you rehearse something that you've never actually done physically, there's scientific evidence to prove you will get better at it. I mean, it even goes into things like building muscle strength. So you can imagine lifting weights. Imagine it. You can imagine lifting weights. And if you do it every single day for a certain period of time, after a certain number of weeks, you will have built increased muscle strength and muscle mass. So therefore, anything that in this state of consciousness, call it a hypnotic trance, alpha state of consciousness or theta state of consciousness, if you program things into your subconscious mind, your subconscious mind, part of your mind will hold on to that like it really happened, like it's really true. So it's kind of, I think of it as like mental rehearsal, but it doesn't have to be in the present moment. It can be in the future. And in neuro-linguistic programming, it's called future pacing. So you put somebody into the future, like speaking in front of an audience of 5,000 people, everything's going great. And that becomes almost like a memory of something that they're gonna do in 2 weeks. And you can take them into the past. Let's say that they were at a school assembly and they were supposed to speak and it all went bad. And they took on this real fear of public speaking at that moment. Well, you can redo it. You can redo it so this time it's an empowering experience. And that new memory becomes integrated with whatever was there before so that it's less of an impediment for them moving forward. And I will see if I have anything else written down here before we go. Oh, here's the other thing I wanted to talk about. I want to talk about soul contracts. So I think I had a cute little graphic here for that. Where's my, there we go. Okay, so when you get married, you take on a contract, a legally binding contract of being married. And that has all kinds of terms and conditions that goes along with it depending upon where you live. You're also engaging in, for most people who get married, say in a church, you're taking on a spiritual contract as well, like till death do us part. Well, I mentioned about life between lives, pre-life planning. We often have contracts with other souls, a deal, if you will, to help both of us progress. At some point, that spiritual contract may not make sense for us anymore. We may have evolved beyond the need for that contract, and there's no reason to continue to have this obligation to this other person and them to have an obligation to us. In fact, at some point, it could be kind of deleterious. So there are cases where I will have the client ask the guide, do I have a contract, a spiritual contract with my father? Yes, you do. Is it in my highest and best interest to rewrite that contract? Is it in my highest and best interest to destroy that old contract and create a new one? And if the answer is yes, then we would want to do that. We would want to have the guide produce the old contract, help the client understand what were the terms and conditions of that contract, and then produce a new contract with a new definition of a new relationship with this person. And then ask their agreement, the other person asks their agreement if they're okay with burning the old contract and signing their name to the new one, and then giving it to the spirit guide for safekeeping. And this is one of the ways that, and I'll probably do a future Friday Live on this topic, on relationships. This is one of the ways that you can sometimes improve a difficult relationship. So I'm going to just scan through here one more time, see if there's one more question that I can answer, and then we'll move on. I'm going to go all the way down here. Let's see. All right, so here's a tough one. Kenzie Scott, sorry. Essay. Excusing abuse by claiming it is agreed in a soul contract is something I have heard far too much in spiritual teaching. No divine soul would come to earth to cause suffering to another. Okay, I got you. I hope I made clear before that as a human being, I'm not excusing any kind of wrongful behavior from one human being to another. Everything I report is coming directly from the client. So I'm not saying to the client, oh, you know, your father probably was just trying to help you become a more evolved human being, and that's why he did X, Y, and Z to you. No, 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 no. No. Client is telling me this is the information I, as client, am receiving from my spirit guide, from ascended masters, and so forth. So, for me, then to override that, I feel would be arrogant. And I feel like it would be doing a disservice to others to report something that isn't true or fail to report something that I have heard over and over and over again. So believe me, I get this concept, and I don't want to excuse vile behavior. In fact, I never would, never will as a human being. However, like the yin and the yang symbol, within the light, there is always darkness. Within the darkness, there is always light. That sometimes in these horrible relationships, there can be the seeds for vast empowerment. And from what I've been told from my clients, many times, that relationship was agreed upon long ago. So thank you for asking the question. I chose it because it is tough, and I meant what I said before, that I really like, you know, the sort of challenging question, so I appreciate you asking it. All right, so we're going to go with this. Raina, I heard that we're not supposed to know from someone else what your life purpose is because it is very personal. So how does that fit that you get into a hypnotic session to find out? Okay, great question. First of all, there are times when a client asks the guide, what is my life purpose? No answer. They don't always answer that question. In fact, you can ask all the questions you want and you're not always going to get an answer. And sometimes people get really frustrated and they think they're doing something wrong, but it may be you're just not ready to hear it. And I would go a little bit further and say, you can do the session without a hypnotist, without me present. That's one of the reasons why I make these different sessions on YouTube, so that you can just sit there. I don't have any idea what's happening. You can comment, tell us what happened in the session or not. And in a session that is one-on-one, I think the same thing would be true. I don't think we can get one over on the powerful and loving physical entities like spirit guides and ascended masters. I think if they didn't want a hypnotist or whomever is working with you to know that information, they wouldn't reveal it to you. So, good question, appreciate it. I think that's about it for today. I just love answering these questions though, so maybe if there's another one, I'll jump in. Let's see. Just bear with me one more second here. All right, so here's one from Jessica Louise. I know my spirit guide is a female. However, I've only seen her from the waist down. I'm still waiting for her to reveal her identity and name to me. Same kind of thing, I would say. Jessica, great question. Thanks for asking it. That the guide will only reveal information to you that the guide believes you are ready to receive. And they will only reveal it to you in the order in which they believe it will have the greatest impact upon you. So an example of this would be, sort of a standard session. We go in, we meet the guide, ask the guide, did the issue begin earlier in this life? No. Did it begin in a past life? Yes. Next question, does the client have your permission to go back to that past life and be shown the relevant scenes so they'll remember exactly what happened and know how to heal it or fix it? The guide might say no. Okay. Then the next question would be, is there something that you want the client to know or to experience before you will allow them to have that past life regression experience? And the answer is almost always yes. If we then say, okay, so will you take them now to have that other experience that you want them to have? If the guide takes them and they bring them to another experience, and then we come back and then we say, okay, now that clients had this experience, can they go into the past life? The answer is overwhelmingly almost always yes. So just keep in mind that there is a higher way of these things unfolding. We think we know how we want to do it, and how we generally want to do it is very linear, right? We want to get to the answer, but it's way more intricate than that. And it has so much to do with what we're ready for. It doesn't make sense to throw something at someone that they're not ready for. If you, for example, were being led towards forgiveness regarding someone in your life, you can't very well usually expect you to just go, okay, well, just go forgive them then. Well, no, if that were the case, you would have done it a long time ago. It's usually important for you to have some other kind of experience so that you are willing to forgive. And these things generally have to happen in a certain manner, in a certain way, before you would be willing to have that experience. And to try to rush you into it would probably fail. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you so much, too, for hanging in there when my computer crapped out. I really appreciate that. That's one of those kind of unexpected occurrences. I'll be doing Friday Live next Friday. Not exactly sure on the topic yet. That's me, Mr. Planner, right there. That's why I'm asking you to please help me with topics you'd like to see. That really makes things a lot easier. But I will definitely be doing one next Friday at 5 o'clock. My plan is to do one every Friday at 5. It's not always going to be on past life regression, spirit guides, life between life, and so forth. The first one I did was on weight loss. We can do topics on stress, we can do them on addictions, we can do them on relationships, we can do them on finances. There's all kinds of things that we can do sessions on, so your feedback is greatly appreciated. Please remember to subscribe to my channel so you can get access to all the new content that I'm putting out there. And again, thank you very much for tuning in, and we will see you next Friday at 5 o'clock. Have a great weekend. Bye.